Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped into the pristine corridors of the Galactic Defense Academy. The artificial gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth's standard, making each step deliberate and measured. Around him, cadets from dozens of species moved with purpose, their conversations creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that human ears could barely process. The Academy sprawled across 3 massive space stations orbiting Nexus Prime, the political heart of the Terran Galactic Alliance. For 2 centuries, these institutions had trained the finest military minds from across known space. Marcus was the first human to ever set foot inside their hallowed halls. Standing nearly 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and calloused hands, Marcus looked unremarkable compared to the towering Krillian warriors with their chitinous exoskeletons or the graceful Velaran diplomats whose crystalline skin reflected the station's artificial sunlight. His simple academy uniform, hastily modified to fit human proportions, made him appear almost primitive among the high-tech gear worn by other species. The other cadets stared as he passed, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most species viewed them as technologically inferior barbarians who had somehow stumbled into space through sheer luck rather than advancement. "Attention, all cadets!" The announcement echoed through the corridor in perfect universal standard, followed by translations in 17 different languages. "Report to Combat Training Facility 7 for mandatory tactical assessment." Marcus checked his personal datapad, confirming his assignment. Combat training was exactly what he had hoped for. Back on Earth, he had served in the Colonial Marine Corps for 8 years, specializing in close-quarters combat and urban warfare. His record spoke for itself. 3 tours in the Outer Rim conflicts, commendations for valor, and expertise in 17 different martial arts disciplines. The training facility occupied an entire level of the station, its walls lined with weapons from across the galaxy. Holographic training grounds could simulate any environment from frozen tundras to molten hellscapes. Advanced medical bays ensured that even the most realistic combat scenarios rarely resulted in permanent injury. As Marcus entered the main training area, conversations died. Nearly 200 cadets had gathered, representing 43 different species. At the center stood Instructor Vashti, a 12-foot-tall hegemony veteran whose 4 arms ended in razor-sharp talons. His reputation preceded him even to Earth. 3 decades of military service, veteran of the Andromedae Wars, and architect of modern combat doctrine. Cadets, Vashti's voice resonated through bioacoustic speakers that translated his natural, clicking speech into universal standard. "Today we assess your combat capabilities. You will be evaluated on tactical thinking, weapon proficiency, and close-quarters combat skills." The instructor's 4 eyes swept across the assembled cadets before settling on Marcus. "We have a new species joining our ranks. Humans claim to be warriors, yet they possess no natural weapons, no enhanced strength, no telepathic abilities. They are, by all measurable standards, physically inferior to every other spacefaring race." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several Krillian cadets clicked their mandibles in what Marcus had learned was their version of laughter. A group of Velaran students shared harmonic frequencies that roughly translated to expressions of amusement. However, Vashti continued, "The Terran government has requested their inclusion in our program. We shall evaluate their capabilities objectively." Marcus stood straighter, feeling the weight of representation on his shoulders. Every human's future in galactic society might depend on his performance here. No pressure at all. The first phase involved weapon proficiency testing. Cadets rotated through stations featuring plasma rifles, particle beams, gravity weapons, and neural disruptors. Marcus had trained with human-manufactured versions of these weapons, but the galactic standard equipment felt different in his hands. At the plasma rifle station, he scored in the 85th percentile, respectable but not outstanding. The Krillian cadet beside him achieved 92% accuracy with her 4-armed advantage. The particle beam station went better, his marine training in energy weapons serving him well with a score of 90%. Not terrible for a primitive species, commented Zethkar, a hegemony cadet whose species had invented most of the weapons being tested. His tone carried the casual arrogance Marcus had grown accustomed to hearing from older galactic civilizations. The tactical simulation phase proved more challenging. Cadets faced holographic scenarios requiring strategic thinking and rapid decision-making. Marcus found himself in a simulated urban environment, tasked with extracting civilians from a hostile zone while minimizing casualties. The scenario was designed for species with natural telepathic abilities or enhanced sensory perception. Most galactic races could sense enemy positions through pheromone detection, electromagnetic field reading, or psychic awareness. Humans possessed none of these advantages. Instead, Marcus relied on pure observation and deduction. He noticed subtle environmental clues, scuff marks on walls indicating recent passage, thermal signatures visible through his visor, and sound patterns that revealed enemy positions. His solution was unconventional but effective, earning him a score that surprised many observers. Interesting approach, Instructor Vashti noted, reviewing Marcus's tactical assessment. Your species compensates for physical limitations through environmental awareness and adaptability. As the day progressed, Marcus began to notice something curious. While other species excelled in their natural strengths, they often struggled when forced outside their comfort zones. Krillians dominated strength-based challenges, but faltered in scenarios requiring fine motor control. Velerans excelled at coordination and telepathic communication, but struggled with individual initiative when cut off from their group consciousness. Humans, it seemed, were generalists in a galaxy of specialists. The final phase approached, close-quarters combat assessment. This was where Marcus expected to shine. Every other test had been an adaptation of human skills to alien technology and scenarios. Hand-to-hand combat was pure, primal, and fundamentally human. Cadets will demonstrate unarmed combat techniques, Vashti announced. You will face opponents from different species to test adaptability and skill. A holographic arena materialized in the center of the training facility. The first demonstrations showcased the natural fighting styles of various species. Krillians used their 4 arms and exoskeleton for devastating crushing attacks. Velerans employed coordinated group tactics that resembled a deadly dance. Hegemony fighters relied on their size advantage and natural weapons. Each demonstration was technically proficient, but predictable. Every species fought according to their biological advantages and cultural traditions. Their techniques had been refined over millennia, but remained essentially static. When Marcus's turn arrived, the arena fell silent. He faced a Krillian opponent, Vextera, who outweighed him by nearly 200 pounds and possessed natural armor that could deflect most blade weapons. Her 4 arms gave her obvious advantages in reach and striking power. Begin, Vashti commanded. Vextera charged forward, confident in her species' traditional approach. Her primary arms swung in powerful haymaker punches, while her secondary arms prepared grappling techniques designed to utilize her strength advantage. Marcus didn't retreat or try to match her power. Instead, he moved laterally, using footwork that seemed to confuse his opponent. Vextera's punches met empty air as Marcus slipped past her guard using techniques that seemed impossible to predict. The arena erupted in confused chatter as Marcus demonstrated concepts alien to galactic combat doctrine. Feints, misdirection, and attacks that targeted joints and pressure points rather than attempting to overpower his opponent's natural armor. When Vextera overextended on a particularly aggressive attack, Marcus moved with fluid precision. He grabbed her leading arm, used her momentum against her, and executed a throw that sent the 200-pound Krillian crashing to the ground. Before she could recover, he had secured a joint lock that forced her submission. The arena fell completely silent. Impossible whispered Zitkar. Krillians are biologically superior in every measurable category. Marcus helped Vextera to her feet, offering a respectful bow that she returned with obvious confusion. In her species' culture, the strong dominated the weak through direct application of force. The concept of using technique to overcome physical disadvantages was completely foreign. Again, Vashti commanded, his 4 eyes focused intently on Marcus. Face a different opponent. This time Marcus faced a Veleran named Silandra, whose species relied on speed and coordination rather than brute force. Velerans fought in flowing, dance-like movements that created opportunities for precise strikes against vital points. The match began with Silandra moving in the traditional Veleran pattern, her crystalline skin shifting colors to communicate with teammates who weren't there. Her fighting style was beautiful and efficient, refined over thousands of years of martial tradition. Marcus watched for exactly 30 seconds, studying her patterns and timing. Valor in combat doctrine emphasized grace and precision but followed predictable sequences. Once he identified the rhythm, he could anticipate her movements. When Silandra launched a series of precise strikes aimed at pressure points that would incapacitate most species, Marcus simply wasn't where she expected him to be. He had shifted stance, moving from a traditional defensive posture to something that resembled boxing footwork, mixed with elements that observers couldn't identify. His counterattack came in a combination that violated everything galactic species understood about combat. A feint with his left hand that drew her guard high, followed by a low kick that swept her legs, finishing with a grappling technique that put her in a submission hold within seconds. 2 victories against opponents who should have dominated him through natural advantages. This is unprecedented, Instructor Vashti muttered, his mandibles clicking in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as intense concentration. Your fighting style incorporates elements I don't recognize. What combat doctrine does your species follow? Marcus straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. Around him, 200 cadets from across the galaxy stared with expressions ranging from confusion to respect to outright disbelief. Instructor, Marcus replied, humans don't follow a single combat doctrine. We adapt. The simple statement sent ripples of conversation through the assembled cadets. In galactic society, combat traditions were sacred, passed down through generations, and refined over millennia. Each species had their way of fighting, perfected through evolution and cultural development. Adaptation is not a doctrine, Vashti responded, though his tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. Combat effectiveness requires specialization, perfection of natural abilities, maximization of evolutionary advantages. Marcus nodded respectfully. With respect, Instructor, humans learn to fight before we learn to make fire. We've been developing combat techniques for hundreds of thousands of years, not just as a species trait, but as individuals. Every human martial art incorporates elements from previous systems, improves on them, combines them in new ways. He gestured toward the defeated opponents, both of whom were listening intently. Krillian combat doctrine maximizes their four-armed advantage and natural armor. Valorant techniques utilize their speed and coordination. Both are perfect for their species. But when facing something unexpected, something that doesn't follow the rules they've optimized against, they become predictable. You're suggesting, Vashti said slowly, that your species' lack of natural weapons or enhanced abilities is actually an advantage? Marcus considered the question carefully. Around him, the arena remained silent, except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the occasional click of translating equipment. Instructor, every species here today is stronger, faster, or more advanced than humans in some way. But each species also fights the same way their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. Humans are different. We steal techniques, modify them, combine them, improve them. A human martial artist might use Terran boxing, add elements from Okinawan karate, incorporate Brazilian ground fighting, blend in Filipino weapon work, and finish with Russian wrestling. We don't perfect one style. We become something new every time we train. The implications of his words settled over the arena like a gravity field. If Marcus was correct, then humanity's greatest weakness, their lack of natural specialization, might actually be their greatest strength in a galaxy where every other species had become locked into evolutionary optimization. Vashti's 4 eyes narrowed as he processed this information. In his 3 decades of military service, he had encountered thousands of different fighting styles from dozens of species. Each was refined, perfected, and ultimately predictable once you understood the biological and cultural factors that shaped their development. But this human had just demonstrated something unprecedented, the ability to analyze, adapt, and counter techniques he had never encountered before, all within the span of a single combat engagement. Cadet Chun, the instructor said formally, I believe your species requires more comprehensive evaluation than standard protocols allow. The statement sent murmurs through the assembled cadets. Standard evaluation protocols had been sufficient for every species that had joined the Galactic Defense Academy in its 200-year history. The suggestion that humans might need special consideration was both unprecedented and unsettling for many observers. As the training session concluded and cadets began filing out of the facility, Marcus found himself surrounded by curious students from various species. Some wanted to understand his fighting techniques, others questioned the validity of his victories, and a few seemed genuinely interested in learning more about human capabilities. Vexterra, the Krillian he had defeated, approached with her characteristic directness. "Human Marcus, your combat method is confusing. You did not attempt to match my strength or overcome my natural advantages. This is not logical." Marcus smiled, appreciating her straightforward nature. In human combat philosophy, fighting your opponent's strength is usually a losing strategy. We call it fighting smarter, not harder. Instead of trying to be stronger than you, I use techniques that made your strength irrelevant. But this requires knowledge of many different fighting systems. Silandra, the Velaran, interjected. Her crystalline skin shifted through thoughtful blue patterns. How does one individual master so many disciplines? Combat traditions represent the accumulated wisdom of entire civilizations. To discard them for expedient combinations is primitive. Marcus nodded respectfully, recognizing the cultural sensitivity of his criticism. "I'm not suggesting your traditions are wrong. Hegemony combat doctrine has clearly been successful for your species for thousands of years. But humans develop differently. We never had the luxury of single environment optimization." He paused, considering how to explain human military history to species that had developed in relatively stable conditions. Earth has dozens of different environments, hundreds of different cultures, each developing their own fighting styles. Humans have been fighting each other for our entire evolutionary history. We had to adapt constantly or die. The implications of his statement settled over the group. Most galactic species had achieved spaceflight after developing unified planetary governments and standardized military doctrines. The idea of a species that had spent millennia in constant internal conflict was both fascinating and horrifying to civilizations that prize stability and tradition. As the crowd dispersed, Instructor Vashti remained in the arena, reviewing holographic recordings of the day's combat demonstrations. His four eyes tracked Marcus's movements frame by frame, analyzing techniques that seemed to violate everything he understood about effective combat doctrine. The human moved inefficiently by traditional standards, wasting energy on complex footwork and unnecessary positional changes. His attacks often seemed to target areas that should have been irrelevant against opponents with natural armor or enhanced durability. Yet somehow these apparently flawed techniques had proven devastatingly effective. Vashti had spent his career studying combat effectiveness across dozens of species. He had developed the current evaluation protocols specifically to identify the most capable warriors from across the galaxy. Those protocols assumed that effectiveness came from maximizing natural advantages and perfecting traditional techniques. Marcus Chun had just demonstrated that those assumptions might be fundamentally flawed. The instructor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully as he composed his report for the Academy command. Human inclusion in the Galactic Defense Academy had been a political decision, driven by diplomatic considerations rather than military necessity. Earth's representatives had requested admission as a gesture of goodwill and integration into galactic society. Nobody had expected humans to actually excel at military training. As Marcus made his way back to his assigned quarters, he reflected on the day's events. The combat demonstrations had gone better than expected, but he sensed that his success might create as many problems as opportunities. In his experience, being unexpectedly effective often made you more enemies than friends. The human quarters were located in a section of the station originally designed for species with similar environmental requirements. The rooms were smaller than those assigned to larger species, but included atmospheric controls that could accommodate a wide range of breathing gas mixtures. His personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Commander Sarah Mitchell's face appeared on the holographic display, her expression serious despite the significant transmission delay. "Marcus, preliminary reports suggest your first day exceeded expectations. Political analysts here are pleased with the diplomatic implications, but military intelligence is asking some interesting questions about human combat capabilities." She paused, reviewing notes that weren't visible to Marcus. "Some of our allies are expressing concern about human unpredictability in combat situations. Apparently, Our lack of standardized doctrine is being interpreted as either a significant advantage or a potential threat, depending on who's doing the interpreting. Marcus wasn't surprised. In his experience, anything that challenged established paradigms tended to make people nervous, especially when those paradigms have been stable for centuries. Continue your training as planned, Commander Mitchell continued. But be aware that you're no longer just representing human military capability. Some species are beginning to view humans as a potential wildcard in galactic military balance. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. Through his quarter's viewport, he could see the surface of Nexus Prime rotating slowly below. Somewhere on that planet, representatives from dozens of species were probably discussing the implications of human combat doctrine for galactic security. He had come to the Academy to learn about galactic military science and demonstrate human capabilities. Instead, he seemed to have stumbled into a much larger conversation about the nature of warfare itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove human worth in galactic society. But tonight, Marcus Chun allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. For the first time since humans had achieved spaceflight, other species were taking them seriously as potential warriors rather than dismissing them as primitive newcomers. It was a start. The next morning brought an unexpected change to Marcus's schedule. Instead of the standard tactical theory courses, his personal datapad displayed a message requesting his immediate presence in Advanced Combat Analysis Laboratory 12. The facility was restricted to senior cadets and faculty, typically reserved for experimental weapons testing and classified research. Marcus arrived to find Instructor Vashti waiting alongside two other faculty members he hadn't encountered before. Commander Tichufsra, a serpentine Nagulin whose species served as the Academy's primary strategists, coiled behind a holographic display showing combat footage from the previous day. Beside her stood Professor Keldurin, a massive Titan-class hegemony whose intellectual reputation rivaled his physical intimidation factor. Cadet Chun, Vashti began without preamble. Your combat performance has raised questions that require immediate investigation. We need to understand whether your techniques represent individual skill or species-wide capability. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Marcus's fights from multiple angles with detailed biomechanical analysis overlays. Energy expenditure graphs, impact force measurements, and reaction time calculations created a complex web of data around the combat footage. Commander Kaiser's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air in a gesture Marcus had learned indicated deep concentration among her species. Your fighting methodology violates established principles of combat efficiency. According to our calculations, your techniques should have failed against opponents with superior physical attributes. Professor Keldarin's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. His translation device struggled with the subsonic frequencies his species used for emphasis. Yet video analysis confirms you achieved victory through methods our combat algorithms cannot predict or counter. This suggests fundamental gaps in our understanding of warfare. Marcus stood at attention, uncertain whether he was being praised or accused of something. The intense scrutiny made him feel like a laboratory specimen rather than a military cadet. Cadet Chun, Vashti continued, we require you to participate in expanded testing protocols. Your fighting style will be analyzed against opponents specifically trained to counter human techniques, once we determine what those techniques actually are. The statement revealed the depth of the Academy's confusion. For 2 centuries, they had successfully categorized and understood combat doctrines from 43 different species. Human fighting methods apparently defied their analytical frameworks entirely. I'm willing to participate, sir, Marcus replied, but I should clarify something about human martial arts. There isn't a single human technique to analyze. Different human cultures developed hundreds of distinct fighting systems over thousands of years. Commander Tichusura's scales shifted color in what Marcus recognized as surprise. You're claiming your species developed multiple combat doctrines simultaneously? That would create dangerous tactical confusion during military operations. Marcus shook his head. Not confusion, sir. Adaptation. Human military units train in multiple combat systems specifically to avoid predictability. A human soldier might use different techniques depending on the opponent, environment, or available weapons. The 3 instructors exchanged glances that clearly indicated this information complicated their analysis significantly. Professor Calderon's massive frame leaned forward as he studied the combat footage with renewed interest. Demonstrate, Vashti commanded simply. The laboratory's floor space cleared as holographic opponents materialized around Marcus. Each projection represented a different species' fighting style, programmed with the combat patterns and capabilities of actual galactic warriors. Engage the Krillian simulation first, Commander Tetrusisera instructed. Use whatever techniques you deem appropriate. The holographic Krillian charged forward with the same aggressive style Vextera had employed the previous day. Marcus adopted a defensive stance that drew from traditional boxing guards, allowing the simulated opponent to close distance while he studied its movement patterns. When the hologram committed to a four-armed assault, Marcus shifted his approach entirely. Instead of the grappling techniques he had used against Vextera, he employed striking combinations derived from Muay Thai and kickboxing, targeting the joints where the Krillian's four arms connected to its torso. The simulation stumbled, its programming unable to compensate for attacks directed at structural weaknesses rather than traditional target points. Marcus finished the engagement with a submission hold borrowed from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, completely different from his previous day's technique. Fascinating, Professor Calderon rumbled. Same opponent type, entirely different methodology. Continue with the Velarin simulation. This time Marcus faced a holographic opponent that moved with the flowing grace characteristic of Velarin combat doctrine. Instead of analyzing patterns as he had with Silandra, he adopted an aggressive approach inspired by close-quarters combat training from his Marine Corps experience. The Velarin simulation relied on maintaining optimal distance and timing for precise strikes. Marcus negated this advantage by closing distance aggressively, using techniques derived from Krav Maga and military combatives that prioritized ending fights quickly rather than demonstrating technical mastery. Within seconds, the simulation was overwhelmed by combinations it hadn't been programmed to counter. Marcus had essentially transformed from a defensive strategist into an aggressive brawler, adapting his entire approach based on the opponent's vulnerabilities. This is unprecedented, Commander Tetrusisera hissed, her scales shifting through rapid color changes that indicated extreme agitation. You've demonstrated 3 completely different fighting methodologies in less than 10 minutes. Marcus straightened, breathing heavily from the exertion. With respect, Commander, I've actually used elements from at least 12 different martial arts systems in these demonstrations. Humans typically blend techniques fluidly rather than switching between distinct styles. The instructors fell silent as the implications settled over them. Every other species in the galaxy fought according to their evolutionary optimization and cultural traditions. Combat effectiveness came from perfecting their natural advantages and minimizing their biological limitations. Humans appear to have evolved as adaptive predators, capable of analyzing opponents and modifying their approach in real time based on changing circumstances. Cadet Chun, Vashti said slowly, are you suggesting that every human possesses this adaptive capability, or are you an exceptional individual among your species? Marcus considered the question carefully. His answer could significantly impact how other species viewed humanity's military potential. Sir, most humans who receive combat training learn multiple fighting systems to some degree. Military personnel, especially trained in whatever techniques prove most effective for their operational environment. I'm probably above average in terms of formal training, but the basic principle of adaptive fighting is common among human warriors. Professor Calderon activated his personal recording device, documenting every word. How many distinct combat systems exist within human civilization? Hundreds, sir. Maybe thousands if you include regional variations and modern hybrid systems. Humans have been refining fighting techniques for our entire evolutionary history. When cultures met through trade or warfare, their martial arts evolved by incorporating elements from each other. The statement sent visible ripples of concern through the 3 instructors. A species that had developed hundreds of distinct combat systems suggested a level of internal conflict that most galactic civilizations would consider pathologically violent. Commander Tetrusisera coiled more tightly, a defensive posture among her species. Your civilization achieved spaceflight while maintaining this level of martial diversity? Most species unify their combat doctrines as they advance technologically. Marcus nodded. Humans are competitive by nature, sir. Even during peaceful periods, we continue developing new fighting techniques through sport and personal interest. Mixed martial arts competitions drive constant innovation as fighters seek advantages over opponents who know their previous techniques. Sport. Professor Calderon's voice carried undertones that his translation device rendered as profound confusion. You develop military techniques for entertainment purposes? Not exactly military techniques, sir, but the principles often translate. Human sports fighting allows experimentation with new combinations and techniques without the life or death consequences of actual warfare. Successful innovations get adopted by military and law enforcement units. The three instructors exchanged meaningful glances. The implications for galactic military balance were staggering if Marcus accurately represented human capabilities. A species that constantly innovated their combat techniques could potentially counter any established doctrine through pure adaptability. We need to expand these tests, Vashti decided. Cadet Shun, you will face live opponents from multiple species, not holographic simulations. We need to understand how your techniques perform against adaptive opponents who can modify their approach based on observing your methods. Over the following days, Marcus found himself in increasingly complex combat scenarios. Word had spread throughout the academy about the human who fought with impossible techniques, drawing curious observers to every training session. His first live opponent was Drac Moore, a senior cadet from the Hegemony military caste whose natural weapons and armor made him seem invincible to most opponents. The 8-foot-tall warrior had achieved legendary status among academy students for never losing a combat engagement. The match began with Drac Moore employing traditional Hegemony combat doctrine, overwhelming assault designed to crush opposition through superior strength and natural weaponry. His razor-sharp claws and reinforced exoskeleton had proven decisive against every opponent he had faced in 3 years of academy training. Marcus studied his opponent's approach for nearly a full minute, enduring several painful strikes while analyzing Drac Moore's patterns and limitations. The Hegemony fighting style was brutally effective, but relied on opponents either matching their strength or attempting to outmaneuver their reach advantage. Instead, Marcus adopted a strategy derived from Matador techniques, using minimal movements to redirect Drac Moore's attacks while gradually wearing down his opponent's stamina. The Hegemony warrior's massive frame required enormous energy expenditure to maintain his aggressive assault. When Drac Moore began showing signs of fatigue, Marcus shifted to techniques borrowed from Aikido and Judo, using the larger opponent's momentum against him. A perfectly timed throw sent the 8-foot warrior crashing to the ground, where Marcus secured a submission hold that targeted nerve clusters his Marine Corps training had identified as universal weak points among humanoid species. The arena erupted in stunned silence as Drac Moore tapped out, conceding defeat for the first time in his academy career. "Impossible," whispered Vexterra, who had been observing with growing respect. "Drac Moore has defeated opponents twice his size. How can the small human overcome such advantages?" Marcus helped his opponent to his feet, offering a respectful bow that Drac Moore returned with obvious confusion. In Hegemony culture, victory belonged to the strong. The concept of technique overcoming natural advantages violated fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness. "Your fighting confuses me, small human," Drac Moore rumbled, his translation device struggling with undertones of respect and bewilderment. "I felt my strength turned against me, my attacks made worthless by movements I could not predict." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Your techniques are perfect for your physiology and advantages, Drac Moore. But humans learned to fight opponents who were stronger, faster, or better armed than we were. Our techniques evolved to overcome disadvantages rather than exploit advantages." The statement provoked intense discussion among observing cadets. Every other species had developed combat doctrine based on maximizing their natural strengths. The idea of deliberately training to overcome superior opponents represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare. Professor Calderon documented every exchange, building a comprehensive analysis of human combat methodology. His preliminary reports were already circulating among Academy command staff and generating requests for additional information from military intelligence services across the galaxy. "Cadet Chun," he announced after reviewing the day's data, "your combat effectiveness appears to increase when facing physically superior opponents. This contradicts every established principle of military engagement analysis." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, considering how to explain concepts that seemed obvious to humans but revolutionary to other species. Professor, human military doctrine assumes we'll usually face opponents with some kind of advantage. Better technology, superior numbers, stronger positions, whatever. So we train specifically to win anyway. But such preparation would require knowledge of countless different opponent types and capabilities, Commander Teacher protested. No single military organization could prepare for unlimited variables. That's why human martial arts focus on principles rather than specific techniques, Marcus explained. We learn how to analyze opponents quickly, identify weaknesses, and adapt our approach based on what we observe. The specific techniques matter less than understanding how to apply them effectively. The instructors were beginning to understand that they weren't just analyzing a different fighting style, but an entirely different philosophy of combat preparation. Human military thinking assumed constant adaptation against unknown threats rather than perfection of techniques against known opponents. News of Marcus's continued victories spread throughout the academy community. Cadets from species that had never lost combat engagements to other races found themselves questioning fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness. Zethkar, the hegemony cadet who had initially dismissed human capabilities, requested a private match to test his own skills against Marcus's techniques. The engagement proved enlightening for both participants. Zethkar fought with the precision and efficiency his species had perfected over millennia of military tradition. His techniques were flawless, executed with timing and accuracy that demonstrated years of dedicated training. Against traditional opponents, he would have been virtually unbeatable. Marcus recognized the quality of his opponent's skills and adjusted his strategy accordingly. Instead of trying to match Zethkar's technical perfection, he introduced elements of unpredictability that forced the hegemony cadet to respond to situations his training hadn't prepared him for. The match lasted longer than any of Marcus's previous engagements as both fighters adapted to each other's methods. Zethkar's superior technique and natural advantages were gradually neutralized by Marcus's willingness to change approaches mid-fight, switching between striking arts, grappling systems, and hybrid techniques as the situation demanded. When Zethkar finally conceded defeat, his expression mixed frustration with genuine curiosity. Human Marcus, your fighting lacks the beauty and precision of traditional combat arts. Yet somehow, your crude adaptations prove more effective than techniques perfected over thousands of years. Marcus offered his hand in the human gesture of sportsmanship, which Zethkar accepted after a moment's hesitation. My techniques aren't crude, they're practical. Human martial arts evolved to solve problems, not to look beautiful or honor traditions. The statement sparked additional conversation among observers about the purpose and evolution of combat systems. Most galactic species viewed their martial traditions as cultural heritage as well as practical skills. The human approach of constantly modifying techniques based on effectiveness alone seemed almost barbaric to civilizations that prize stability and tradition. Yet the results spoke for themselves. Marcus had now defeated representatives from 6 different species, including opponents who should have dominated him through natural advantages. His success rate was unprecedented in Academy history. As word spread beyond the Academy walls, Marcus found himself at the center of a growing debate about human military capabilities and their implications for galactic security. Some species viewed human adaptability as a valuable asset for Alliance military forces. Others worried about the unpredictability of warriors who refused to follow established doctrine. Instructor Vashti compiled his observations into a classified report that would ultimately reach the highest levels of Galactic Defense Command. His conclusions were both admiring and concerning. Humans represented a completely new paradigm in military thinking, one that could revolutionize or destabilize established galactic military balance. Marcus remained focused on his training, unaware that his combat demonstrations were generating political discussions across known space. He had come to the Academy to learn about galactic military science and prove human worth as warriors. Instead, he was inadvertently challenging fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare itself, forcing ancient civilizations to reconsider military doctrines that had remained unchanged for thousands of years. The real test was yet to come. 3 weeks into his Academy training, Marcus discovered that his reputation had reached the attention of Admiral Kethvar, the Academy's commanding officer and veteran of the legendary Siege of Andromedae. The summons came during his morning tactical analysis class, delivered by a protocol droid whose polished exterior reflected the nervous energy of surrounding cadets. Cadet Chun, report immediately to Command Level 7 for evaluation by Admiral Kethvar, the droid announced in perfect universal standard. The classroom fell silent. In 3 years of Academy attendance, none of the current cadets had ever received a direct summons from the Admiral. Command Level 7 housed the Academy's senior leadership and strategic planning facilities, areas restricted to faculty with highest security clearances. As Marcus made his way through the station's upper levels, he passed through increasingly sophisticated security checkpoints. Each scanner analyzed his biometrics, confirmed his authorization, and logged his movement through restricted areas. The corridors became more spacious and elegant, reflecting the Academy's respect for senior leadership. Admiral Kethvar's office occupied a corner of the command level with panoramic views of Nexus Prime surface below. The Admiral herself was a Vashti, a species known for their strategic brilliance and natural telepathic abilities that made them exceptional military coordinators. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, with distinctive crystalline features that shifted color with her emotional state, she embodied the intellectual sophistication that had made her species natural leaders in galactic military affairs. Cadet Chun, she greeted him without looking up from a holographic display showing military deployment patterns across 3 star systems. Your combat performance has generated considerable discussion among the Academy staff and, more importantly, among intelligence services from several member species. Marcus stood at attention, uncertain whether this attention was positive or problematic. In his experience, unusual interest from senior leadership could indicate either recognition for exceptional performance or concern about potential security issues. Your fighting methods have defeated representatives from 6 different species, including several senior cadets who had never previously lost combat engagements. Admiral Kethvar continued, her crystalline features shifting through thoughtful blue patterns. More significantly, your techniques appear to be completely unpredictable using standard combat analysis algorithms. The Admiral finally turned to face him directly, her telepathic abilities creating a subtle pressure in Marcus's mind that felt like someone trying to read his thoughts. He had been warned that Vashti could detect emotional states and surface thoughts, though they generally respected privacy protocols during official interactions. Cadet Chun, I need to understand whether your combat capabilities represent individual exceptional skill or broader human military potential. The implications for galactic security planning are considerable. Marcus chose his words carefully, aware that his answer could influence military policy affecting Earth's role in galactic affairs. Admiral, my training is fairly representative of human military doctrine, though I may have more formal martial arts experience than average. Most human soldiers receive instruction in multiple combat systems to ensure adaptability in different operational environments. Admiral Kethvar's features shifted through several color patterns as she processed this information. Her telepathic scan confirmed that Marcus believed his own statements, ruling out deliberate deception about human capabilities. You're claiming that adaptive combat methodology is standard for human military forces? She asked. Every member of your species' military receives training in multiple fighting systems. Yes, Admiral. Human military doctrine assumes our forces will face unknown opponents with varying capabilities. Our training emphasizes flexibility and adaptation rather than perfection of single techniques. The Admiral activated a holographic display showing galactic military deployment patterns and threat assessments. Hundreds of star systems appeared as colored points connected by trade routes and patrol corridors, representing the complex web of galactic civilization. Cadet Chun, for 2 centuries the Galactic Defense Alliance has maintained stability through predictable military doctrine. Each member species contributes forces with known capabilities and tactical limitations. This predictability allows coordinated operations and strategic planning. She gestured toward specific systems highlighted in red. However, we face emerging threats from outside our established borders. Unknown species with unpredictable military capabilities that our standard doctrine cannot effectively counter. Marcus began to understand why his combat demonstrations had attracted such high-level attention. The galaxy's military leadership was discovering that their established methods might be inadequate for future challenges. Admiral, you're suggesting that human adaptability could provide advantages against unknown opponents? I'm suggesting, Cadet Shun, that your species might represent exactly the kind of unpredictable military asset we need for emerging security challenges. Her features shifted to determined orange patterns. But I need to verify this assessment through comprehensive testing. Admiral Kethvar led Marcus to a restricted training facility unlike anything he had seen at the Academy. The chamber contained advanced holographic projectors capable of creating completely realistic combat scenarios, medical systems that could treat injuries in real time, and observational equipment that could analyze every aspect of combat performance. This facility is used for classified research into advanced combat techniques, the Admiral explained. You will face simulated opponents based on intelligence reports from outside our galactic borders. Species we've encountered, but never fought, with capabilities that our standard doctrine cannot predict or counter. The first simulation materialized an opponent unlike anything in Marcus's experience. The creature stood 8 feet tall on 4 legs, with 6 arms ending in natural weapons that shifted configuration during movement. Its fighting style combined elements from multiple galactic species, but followed no recognizable pattern. Marcus studied the simulation carefully, noting movement patterns and attack sequences that seemed to violate established combat principles. The creature fought with apparent randomness, switching between aggressive assault and defensive positioning without clear tactical reasoning. Begin engagement, Admiral Kethvar commanded. The simulated opponent attacked immediately with a combination that should have been impossible to execute effectively. 2 arms struck high, while 4 others swept low, creating overlapping threat zones that traditional defensive doctrine couldn't address simultaneously. Marcus responded with techniques that violated his own training, improvising movements that combined elements from wrestling, boxing, and weapons forms without regard for stylistic purity. His approach was messy and unorthodox, but it adapted to threats that followed no predictable pattern. Within minutes, he had secured victory through a submission technique that incorporated elements from at least 4 different martial arts, applied against an opponent whose anatomy required real-time modification of standard holds and leverage points. Remarkable, Admiral Kethvar observed, her features cycling through rapid color changes that indicated intense analysis. Standard tactical algorithms predict 73% casualty rates against that opponent type. You achieved victory with minimal injury. The simulation reset, presenting a different opponent with capabilities borrowed from species beyond current galactic borders. This creature moved with flowing, liquid grace that made its limbs seem to exist in multiple positions simultaneously. Its attacks phased between solid and energy states, requiring defenders to counter both physical and energy-based threats. Marcus adapted again, incorporating movement patterns derived from his study of Velaran combat techniques, while adding defensive methods borrowed from his training in various weapon arts. He treated the creature's energy attacks as he would handle bladed weapons, using evasion and timing rather than attempting to absorb or block attacks. His victory came through techniques that no established martial art had ever developed, because no human opponent had ever possessed similar capabilities. Yet his improvised approach proved effective through pure adaptability and willingness to experiment during actual combat. Admiral, Marcus said after the simulation ended, these opponents require entirely new approaches because they fight in ways that violate established patterns. Human martial arts training emphasizes exactly this kind of adaptation against unknown threats. Admiral Kethvar's features shifted to colors Marcus hadn't seen before, suggesting emotional states the human observers couldn't interpret. Cadet Shun, you've just demonstrated combat effectiveness against opponent types that caused 60% casualties during our last Border Patrol encounters. The implications settled over Marcus like a heavy weight. His training demonstrations weren't academic exercises. They were preparation for real military threats that the galaxy's established forces couldn't handle effectively. Admiral, are you asking me to help develop new training protocols for Alliance forces? I'm asking you to participate in a classified research program aimed at preparing our military for threats that traditional doctrine cannot address. Her features solidified into formal command patterns. Your species' adaptive capabilities may represent our best hope for maintaining galactic security against unknown enemies. Over the following days, Marcus found himself working with the Academy's most advanced research teams. Combat analysts from a dozen species studied his techniques, attempting to understand principles that could be taught to non-human military forces. The challenge proved more complex than initially expected. Human adaptability stemmed from evolutionary and cultural factors that couldn't be easily replicated. Other species had optimized their combat techniques over millennia to maximize their natural advantages, creating mental frameworks that resisted adaptive thinking. Dr. Yilthara, a Nagulan combat psychologist, explained the difficulty during one of their research sessions. Human neural pathways appear optimized for pattern recognition and rapid modification of behavioral responses. Most galactic species develop combat reflexes that resist modification once established. Marcus worked with cadets from various species, attempting to teach basic adaptive principles. The sessions revealed fundamental differences in how different races approached problem-solving and tactical thinking. Krillian students excelled at analyzing opponent strengths and developing counters, but struggled to modify their approach once committed to a tactical plan. Velaran cadets could coordinate beautifully with teammates, but found individual adaptation difficult when separated from group consciousness. Hegemony participants demonstrated superior technical skill and could master new techniques quickly, but their cultural emphasis on perfection made them resist imperfect solutions that might prove more effective than traditional methods. The problem isn't capability, Marcus explained to Admiral Kethvar during a progress review. Every species here has the physical and mental ability to adapt their fighting techniques. But adaptation requires abandoning the idea that your traditional methods are always optimal. You're suggesting cultural barriers rather than biological limitations? The Admiral asked. Yes, Admiral. Humans adapt easily because we've never had a single correct way to fight. Our martial arts evolved through constant conflict and cultural exchange. We're comfortable with imperfection and experimentation because that's how our combat techniques developed. Admiral Kethvar's features cycled through contemplative patterns as she considered the implications. Teaching Alliance forces to fight more like humans would require fundamental changes to military training philosophy, not just tactical instruction. The breakthrough came during a simulated battle scenario involving mixed species teams facing unknown opponents. Instead of trying to teach alien combat techniques to other species, Marcus suggested having human advisors work alongside traditional forces to provide adaptive solutions during actual engagements. The test scenario pitted a team of 6 cadets from different species against simulated opponents designed to counter their traditional fighting styles. Initial attempts using standard Alliance doctrine resulted in total mission failure as the enemy adapted to predictable tactics. When Marcus joined the team as a tactical advisor rather than primary combatant, everything changed. He analyzed enemy patterns in real time, suggested adaptive modifications to his teammates' techniques, and provided unpredictable elements that prevented enemy adaptation. The mixed team achieved complete victory with minimal casualties, proving that human adaptability could enhance rather than replace existing combat doctrine. This changes everything, Admiral Kethvar declared after reviewing the exercise results. Human military integration doesn't require abandoning established techniques. It requires adding adaptive capability to existing tactical frameworks. Word of the successful integration tests spread rapidly through Academy leadership and beyond. Military planners from across the galaxy began requesting information about human combat capabilities and their potential applications to Alliance security operations. Marcus found himself at the center of discussions that would reshape galactic military doctrine. His simple demonstration of human fighting techniques had evolved into a comprehensive evaluation of humanity's role in galactic defense strategy. But the real test was yet to come. Reports from border regions indicated increasing activity from unknown species with capabilities that traditional Alliance forces couldn't counter. The galaxy's military leadership was beginning to realize that their established superiority might be an illusion when facing truly alien threats. Human adaptability, dismissed for decades as primitive lack of specialization, might represent the key to survival in a universe far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Admiral Kethvar's final assessment would determine whether humans became valued partners in galactic defense or remained marginalized newcomers to an established civilization that no longer felt as secure as it once had. The emergency klaxons echoed through the Academy stations at 0347 hours, jolting Marcus from deep sleep. Emergency lighting cast red shadows through the corridors as cadets emerged from quarters in various states of readiness. The automated announcement system cycled through urgent messages in 17 languages, but the core information remained consistent. Unknown contacts detected at the system's outer perimeter. Marcus pulled on his duty uniform while accessing his personal datapad for additional information. The brief tactical summary chilled him. 3 unidentified vessels of unknown configuration had appeared in system without triggering early warning sensors. Their technology seemed completely foreign to Alliance databases, and they were moving toward Nexus Prime with apparent hostile intent. Within minutes, Academy personnel were streaming toward designated emergency stations. Marcus's assignment directed him to Advanced Combat Analysis Laboratory 12, where Admiral Kethvar and her senior staff were coordinating response operations. The laboratory had been transformed into a tactical command center, with holographic displays showing real-time sensor data from the approaching vessels. The unknown ships defied classification. Their hull configurations followed no recognizable design principles, and their energy signatures suggested propulsion systems that shouldn't have been physically possible. Cadet Shun, report to Admiral Kethvar immediately. Instructor Vashti commanded as Marcus entered the facility. The normally composed hegemony officer showed signs of stress that Marcus had never seen before. Admiral Kethvar stood before the central tactical display, her crystalline features cycling through rapid color changes that indicated extreme agitation. Surrounding her, representatives from multiple species worked frantically to analyze data that made no sense according to established scientific principles. Cadet Chun, the Admiral began without preamble. Our visitors appear to possess technology and capabilities that violate everything we understand about physics and military science. Standard Alliance defense protocols are proving completely ineffective. The tactical display showed Alliance patrol vessels attempting to intercept the unknown ships. Their plasma weapons struck the alien hulls without apparent effect, while their defensive shields collapsed instantly when touched by unknown energy beams that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Admiral, how can I assist with analysis of unknown technology? Marcus asked, confused about why a combat instructor would be relevant to this situation. Because, Cadet Chun, these entities appear to fight using principles similar to your combat methodology, complete unpredictability combined with adaptive responses to our countermeasures. Admiral Kethvar's features shifted to determined crimson patterns. Every tactic we employ against them becomes ineffective within minutes as they adapt and counter our responses. Marcus studied the tactical displays more carefully, watching Alliance forces attempt to engage enemies whose behavior defied traditional military analysis. The alien vessels moved in patterns that seemed random, but proved devastatingly effective against coordinated defense formations. Admiral, they're not just adapting to our tactics. They're forcing us to adapt to theirs, then changing the parameters once we commit to new approaches. Precisely. They fight like humans, but with technology we can't understand or counter using conventional methods. Admiral Kethvar activated additional displays showing combat analysis data. Our simulations predict total system defense failure within 6 hours unless we develop completely new tactical approaches. The implications struck Marcus immediately. These unknown entities possessed both advanced technology and adaptive combat doctrine, creating a combination that Alliance forces had never encountered. Traditional galactic military thinking assumed that technological superiority or tactical excellence would prove decisive, but these opponents possessed both advantages plus the ability to modify their approach in real time. Admiral, we need to respond with the same adaptability they're demonstrating. Alliance forces are trying to counter their technology when we should be countering their tactics. Explain, Admiral Kethvar demanded. Marcus gestured toward the tactical displays, showing repeated Alliance failures against the alien vessels. Our forces keep trying variations of the same basic approach. Coordinated formations using standardized weapons and defensive protocols. The aliens adapt to whatever we throw at them because our responses follow predictable patterns. He pointed to specific engagement sequences where Alliance tactical doctrine had created obvious vulnerabilities. But if we fight the way humans fight, constantly changing approaches, using unpredictable combinations, forcing them to adapt to us instead of the other way around, we might neutralize their adaptive advantage. Admiral Kethvar's features shifted through contemplative patterns as she considered Marcus's analysis. Around them, senior staff members from various species looked skeptical about tactical advice from a cadet who had been at the Academy for less than a month. You're suggesting we abandon established Alliance combat doctrine in favor of improvisational tactics against opponents whose capabilities we don't understand. Commander Kakasura's scales displayed colors that clearly indicated doubt about the wisdom of such an approach. I'm suggesting we use human combat principles on a fleet level instead of just individual combat, Marcus replied. These aliens adapt to predictable responses, but they might struggle against opponents who change their tactics faster than they can analyze and counter. Professor Calderon's massive frame leaned forward as he studied the engagement data with renewed interest. The theoretical framework has merit. Alliance tactical doctrine prioritizes coordination and efficiency, creating patterns that adaptive opponents can exploit. Human improvisational methods might prove unpredictable enough to disrupt their adaptation cycles. Admiral Kethvar made a decision that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. Cadet Chun, you will serve as tactical advisor for the system defense operation. Your recommendations will be transmitted to all Alliance vessels with priority execution orders. The appointment stunned everyone in the command center. A human cadet with less than a month of academy training had just been placed in a position to direct military operations involving thousands of personnel and dozens of advanced warships. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like a physical presence. Every decision he made could determine the survival of millions of beings on Nexus Prime and the surrounding orbital installations. Admiral, I need complete tactical flexibility for all Alliance forces. Commanders must be authorized to ignore standard doctrine and improvise based on real-time battlefield conditions. Granted, Admiral Kethvar replied immediately. What are your initial recommendations? Marcus studied the tactical displays, analyzing alien movement patterns and Alliance response capabilities with techniques he had learned from human military doctrine. Instead of trying to predict enemy behavior, he focused on creating situations where predictive analysis would become impossible. Break all standard formations, he began, his voice carrying new authority despite his junior rank. Have our ships attack individually using different tactical approaches for each engagement. No coordination, no pattern they can adapt to. Make every encounter a unique tactical problem. That violates every principle of effective space combat. Commander Tikasura protested. Coordinated formations provide mutual support and maximize firepower efficiency. Against predictable opponents, yes, Marcus agreed. But these aliens are adapting to our coordinated responses. If we attack in ways that even we can't predict, they won't be able to adapt fast enough to counter each individual engagement. Admiral Kethvar transmitted the orders immediately, overriding protests from several senior officers who considered the tactical approach dangerously reckless. The results were immediate and dramatic. Alliance vessels abandoned their elegant formations and began engaging alien ships using improvised tactics that defied established doctrine. Each captain interpreted Marcus's guidelines differently, creating dozens of unique approaches that the alien vessels couldn't simultaneously analyze and counter. A Krillian cruiser captain used his species' natural aggression to execute ramming attacks with defensive shields at maximum power, treating his ship like a massive projectile weapon. Velaran frigates coordinated through their telepathic abilities to execute synchronized attacks from impossible angles, then immediately dispersed before the aliens could respond. Hegemony destroyers used their superior firepower in hit-and-run attacks that violated their traditional doctrine of sustained bombardment, while Nagulan stealth vessels abandoned their usual reconnaissance role to execute surprise assaults on alien flanks. It's working, Professor Calderon announced, his voice carrying amazement despite his analytical nature. The alien vessels are struggling to adapt because they're facing completely different tactical approaches from each Alliance ship. Marcus watched the tactical displays with growing satisfaction as his improvised strategy proved effective. The alien vessels, despite their superior technology and adaptive capabilities, were being forced to respond reactively instead of dictating the terms of engagement. Admiral, they're starting to withdraw toward the outer system, reported a Vashti tactical analyst whose crystalline features reflected excited patterns. Their adaptation cycles can't keep pace with our tactical diversity. But Marcus recognized something in the alien withdrawal pattern that concerned him. They're not retreating, Admiral. They're regrouping to analyze our new approach. Once they understand our improvisational principles, they'll adapt their own tactics to counter unpredictability itself. Admiral Kethvar's features shifted to alarmed orange. How do you counter unpredictability? By becoming even more unpredictable, Marcus replied grimly. They'll probably start using random tactical approaches designed to force us into reactive patterns. We need to evolve our strategy before they figure out how to adapt to adaptive behavior. The next phase of the engagement proved Marcus's prediction accurate. The alien vessels returned using completely random attack patterns that seemed to have no tactical logic whatsoever. Their movements became impossible to predict because they apparently weren't trying to optimize their effectiveness. They were simply generating chaos that prevented Alliance forces from establishing any kind of tactical rhythm. Alliance captains found themselves constantly reacting to attacks that made no strategic sense, unable to develop effective responses to behavior that seemed deliberately irrational. They've adapted to our adaptation, Marcus observed. Now we need to adapt to their adaptation to our adaptation. That statement makes my brain hurt, Commander Titus hissed, her scales cycling through frustrated patterns. Marcus studied the new alien behavior, looking for patterns within the apparent randomness. Human military experience had taught him that even seemingly irrational behavior usually served some underlying purpose. Admiral, they're using chaos as a tactical weapon, but chaos has to follow some basic principles or their technology wouldn't function. I think I can identify the limits of their randomness and use those limits against them. Over the next hour, Marcus developed what would later be called meta-adaptive tactics, responses designed to counter opponents who were themselves countering adaptive behavior. Instead of trying to predict alien actions, he focused on predicting the boundaries within which their apparent randomness had to operate. His recommendations became increasingly complex, requiring Alliance forces to think about tactics in ways that violated centuries of military tradition. Captains were instructed to make decisions that seemed tactically irrational, but served larger strategic purposes that wouldn't become apparent until multiple engagements had concluded. The final phase of the battle resembled a complex dance between opponents who were each trying to out-adapt the other's adaptation strategies. Both sides employed tactics that would have seemed completely insane under normal circumstances, yet proved devastatingly effective in the context of their bizarre engagement. Marcus's ultimate insight came when he realized that the aliens' greatest advantage, their superior adaptation speed, could become a vulnerability if they were forced to adapt too quickly to process information effectively. Overload their adaptation cycles, he ordered. Every ship execute completely different tactics every 30 seconds. Change faster than they can analyze and respond. The resulting battle became a chaotic swirl of constantly shifting tactical approaches that pushed both sides beyond their operational limits. Alliance vessels changed their attack patterns so rapidly that their own crews struggled to keep pace, while alien ships found their adaptation systems overwhelmed by the sheer volume of tactical variations they needed to process. When the alien vessels finally withdrew from the system, both sides had been fundamentally changed by the engagement. The aliens had discovered that their technological and adaptive advantages weren't insurmountable, while Alliance forces had learned that their established military doctrine might be inadequate for future threats. Admiral Kethvar's assessment of the battle would reshape galactic military thinking for generations to come, with human adaptive principles becoming integrated into Alliance tactical doctrine at every level. But, for Marcus, the most important lesson was simpler. In a universe full of unknown threats, the ability to adapt might matter more than any technological or natural advantage. 6 months after the alien incursion, Marcus stood before the assembled Galactic Defense Council in the Great Chamber beneath Nexus Prime's surface. Representatives from 47 species filled the amphitheater-like space, their diverse forms creating a symphony of colors, sounds, and electromagnetic signatures that represented the full breadth of known civilization. The formal session had been called to address the implications of what analysts were now calling the Adaptation Wars, a series of encounters with unknown species that had forced complete reevaluation of galactic military doctrine. Marcus's role in developing counter-adaptive tactics had made him simultaneously the most celebrated and controversial military theorist in Alliance space. Admiral Kethvar introduced him to the Assembly with formal protocol that emphasized both his achievements and his unprecedented position as the youngest tactical advisor in galactic military history. Honored representatives, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. The events of recent months have demonstrated that our galaxy faces threats that traditional military doctrine cannot address effectively. The species we encountered possessed not only superior technology, but adaptive capabilities that rendered our established tactical advantages meaningless. A ripple of movement passed through the assembly as representatives shifted in their various seating configurations. Some species required specialized atmospheric conditions, others needed specific gravitational fields, and several existed as energy patterns that interfaced with the chamber through technological mediation. Ambassador Veldar of the Hegemony rose to address the assembly, his massive frame commanding immediate attention. Human Shun, your tactical innovations proved effective against a single unknown threat. However, restructuring galactic defense doctrine based on one engagement seems premature. Our established methods have maintained peace for 2 centuries. Marcus nodded respectfully, recognizing the political delicacy of suggesting fundamental changes to systems that had proven successful for established civilizations. Ambassador Veldar, I agree that our established systems have been remarkably successful, but they succeeded against known threats using predictable capabilities. The universe appears to contain species that operate according to completely different paradigms. He activated the chamber's holographic display system, showing tactical analysis from recent border encounters. Over the past months, Alliance forces had detected at least 6 different unknown species, each possessing capabilities that defied conventional military analysis. These encounters suggest that our region of space may be unusual in its stability and predictability. As we expand beyond traditional boundaries, we're discovering that adaptive warfare may be the norm rather than the exception. Representative Silnara of the Velaran Collective harmonized a question that the Chamber's translation systems rendered as, "Are you suggesting that our entire civilization developed in an artificially stable environment?" Marcus considered the question carefully, aware that his answer could have profound implications for galactic politics and military planning. Representative Silnara, I'm suggesting that our success has been built on assumptions about the nature of warfare that may not apply beyond our current borders. Every species in this chamber developed military doctrine optimized for conflicts within known parameters. The holographic displays shifted to show comparative analysis between Alliance military capabilities and the various unknown species encountered in recent months. The patterns revealed troubling trends. Our technology is certainly advanced, our tactics are sophisticated, and our coordination is excellent. But we've optimized everything for fighting opponents who share our basic assumptions about physics, strategy, and military objectives. Director Keflon of the Krillian military caste clicked his mandibles in patterns that translated as skeptical inquiry. Human Marcus, you claim that our fundamental understanding of warfare is flawed. This suggests that every military advancement achieved by galactic civilization over thousands of years has been misdirected. Not misdirected, Director Keflon, but specialized for conditions that may not exist everywhere. Marcus gestured toward displays showing the various unknown species capabilities. Each of these opponents possesses advantages that our doctrine cannot effectively counter because we never imagined such capabilities were possible. The assembled representatives began intense discussions among themselves, creating a cacophony of communication methods that the chamber's systems struggled to translate simultaneously. The implications of Marcus's analysis threatened fundamental assumptions about galactic military superiority that had shaped political and economic policy for generations. Admiral Kethvar rose to address the assembly, her crystalline features displaying the formal patterns that commanded immediate attention from all present species. Honored representatives, Cadet Shin's tactical recommendations have proven effective in every engagement against unknown threats. His adaptive methodologies have achieved victory ratios that exceed traditional doctrine performance by factors of 10 or more. She activated additional displays showing detailed combat analysis from recent encounters. More significantly, forces trained in human adaptive principles have demonstrated capability against opponent types that cause 70% casualty rates using standard alliance tactics. The statistics silenced most discussions as representatives absorbed the implications. Military effectiveness ratios of that magnitude represented the difference between successful defense and civilizational extinction when facing truly alien threats. Ambassador HFY Nexus of the Nagulan Confederacy coiled into formal address posture, her scales displaying colors that indicated grave concern. Admiral Kethvar, implementing human tactical doctrine would require fundamental restructuring of military training, command protocols, and strategic planning across 47 different species. The cultural and practical implications are staggering. Marcus stepped forward, recognizing the valid concerns underlying the ambassador's statement. Ambassador HFY Nexus, I'm not suggesting that every species abandon their traditional combat methods. Human adaptive doctrine works best when combined with existing capabilities rather than replacing them. He modified the holographic displays to show integrated tactical formations that had proven successful in recent training exercises. Alliance forces maintaining their specialized advantages while incorporating adaptive principles that allowed rapid response to unexpected threats. A Krillian warrior using traditional forearmed combat techniques becomes devastatingly effective when trained to adapt those techniques against unknown opponent types. Velaran coordination strategies become even more powerful when combined with individual adaptive capability. The demonstrations showed mixed species formations that preserved traditional cultural approaches while incorporating flexibility principles that enhanced rather than replaced established methods. Professor Keldarin, observing from the Academy delegation, activated his communication device to address the assembly. Representatives, our research indicates that human adaptive capability stems from evolutionary and cultural factors that cannot be directly replicated. However, the principles underlying their methodology can be taught to other species with appropriate training modifications. Senator Vexandra of the Titan Confederacy adjusted her massive frame to address Marcus directly. Human Shun, your species achieved spaceflight only recently, yet you claim to possess military insights superior to civilizations with thousands of years of combat experience. This assertion requires exceptional justification. Marcus had anticipated this challenge, recognizing that human newcomer status remained a significant political obstacle despite demonstrated tactical effectiveness. Senator Vexandra, human military doctrine developed under conditions that forced constant adaptation against diverse threats. Earth's environment and human psychology created evolutionary pressures that specialized other species never experienced. The holographic displays shifted to show comparative analysis of human military history versus galactic military development patterns. Most galactic species achieved technological advancement through stable social development and unified planetary government. Humans achieved spaceflight while maintaining dozens of independent military forces that competed against each other for thousands of years. The statement generated surprised reactions throughout the assembly. Most representatives came from species that had eliminated internal conflict before developing advanced technology, viewing internal warfare as a sign of primitive social development. This constant competition forced human military doctrine to evolve continuously. We couldn't rely on superior technology or natural advantages because our opponents possessed the same capabilities. Survival required developing techniques that worked against enemies who knew our methods and actively tried to counter them. Commander Drakval of the Hegemony Defense Corps rose to address what many representatives were thinking. Human Marcus, your description portrays your species as exceptionally violent and unstable. Why should civilized species adopt military doctrine developed by warlike primitives? Marcus recognized the cultural prejudices underlying the question while acknowledging the valid concerns about human military history. Commander Drakval, human history certainly includes extensive warfare, but that warfare drove innovation that proves essential against truly alien threats. Peaceful development created technological advancement, but may have limited military adaptability. The chamber fell silent as representatives considered the uncomfortable implications. Galactic civilization's greatest strength, peaceful cooperation, and stable development, might also represent a strategic vulnerability when facing species that hadn't shared those advantages. The unknown species we've encountered appear to possess both advanced technology and aggressive expansion drives. They've developed capabilities that peaceful civilizations might never imagine because we've never needed to defend against such threats. Admiral Kethvar supported Marcus's analysis with classified intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture of galactic border regions. Representatives, our Border Patrol reports indicate systematic expansion by at least 12 different unknown species, each possessing capabilities that defeat standard Alliance defense protocols. Without adaptive countermeasures, current projections suggest Alliance military forces would suffer catastrophic casualties in any major engagement. The stark assessment forced the Assembly to confront the possibility that their technological and cultural advantages might prove irrelevant against opponents who operated according to completely different paradigms. Representative Zildar of the Ethereal Collective transmitted a question through energy patterns that translated as deep philosophical concern. Are we witnessing the end of our stable galactic civilization? Must we become warriors to survive contact with unknown space? Marcus addressed the question with careful consideration for its profound implications. Representative Zildar, I don't believe we need to abandon our values or become a warlike civilization, but we may need to develop capabilities that peaceful development didn't require. The universe appears to be more dangerous than our stable region suggested. Human adaptive doctrine offers a path forward that preserves our civilizational values while developing necessary defensive capabilities. We can remain peaceful explorers and diplomats while also becoming effective defenders against threats that don't share our peaceful intentions. The final vote on implementing human adaptive training protocols throughout Alliance military forces passed by a narrow margin, with significant opposition from species concerned about cultural implications of adopting primitive human military methods. Marcus found himself appointed as Director of Adaptive Tactical Development, responsible for integrating human military principles with galactic defense capabilities. The position made him the youngest senior military advisor in galactic history and placed enormous responsibility on his shoulders. As the assembly dispersed, Admiral Kethvar approached Marcus with final instructions that would shape the future of galactic military doctrine. Director Chun, she said, using his new formal title, you now bear responsibility for preparing galactic civilization for threats we can't predict or fully understand. The success of your adaptive training programs may determine whether our civilization survives contact with unknown space. Marcus accepted the responsibility with full awareness of its weight. He had come to the Galactic Defense Academy to learn about advanced military science and prove human worth as warriors. Instead, he had discovered that human military thinking might represent the key to galactic survival in a universe far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity's greatest weakness, their lack of natural specialization, had become their most valuable contribution to galactic civilization. In a galaxy of specialists, the ability to adapt had proven more valuable than any technological or evolutionary advantage. 3 years later, as Marcus stood in the same training facility where Instructor Vashti had once requested a close combat demonstration, he watched cadets from 47 different species practicing adaptive combat techniques that would have seemed impossible under traditional doctrine. The simple desk that had started everything still sat in the corner of the room, a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest demonstrations. Marcus had smashed more than furniture that day. He had shattered assumptions about the nature of warfare itself. The universe was vast, dangerous, and full of unknown threats. But galactic civilization was no longer defenseless against the impossible. They had learned to adapt.